welcome back to Experience Design Podcast. And this next session is super exciting. I have a special guest, Greg Nudelman. And Greg is an innovator, an author, a speaker. Under his belt, he has 32 AI projects and counting. And in this session, we're going to deep dive into UX for AI. Obviously, we're going to start with the challenges, with the problems we face, with the principles, but also cover specific strategies and tactics, the tools you as a UXer can apply in solving user-centric problems with AI. Now, it's going to include things like digital twin, it's going to include things like value matrix, and other tools. So stick around. I hope you're going to enjoy this session. If so, make sure to share it with a friend because that certainly helps. And without further ado, here's Greg Nudelman. It's always keen to understand how did you get into UX to begin with? Because I looked up online, you did some software development. To oversimplify it, obviously it's much more complex, but what's the story behind it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually started in chemistry, and I had this wonderful mentor who basically said, look, if you really want to succeed in chemistry, you have to get your PhD. Otherwise, you're going to be at this level forever. And here's a cool project that the company has acquired, actually a database to manage their combinatorial chemistry department, of which I was part. And having an affinity for software in general, I kind of jumped in with both feet and I said, yeah, I'll figure it out. I'll set it up. And I got a DBA certification and I was able to help set up the system and ingest the data and so on. And so the rest is kind of history, I would say. I I got hooked and went into the field. But I fought it tooth and nail because my mother actually was into databases and all of this, the software design. I guess it was more architecture in those days. There wasn't really design per se. And I fought tooth and nail not to be in her footsteps because I wanted to be very much somebody who took his own path. That's just why I went to the chemistry. It's funny. There's a famous saying: "We went this way because we thought it was going to be easy." So we thought it was going to be easy, but it really isn't, right?
Yeah. So in that case, I guess you kind of learned a lot of things on a job, right? But my understanding was that you kind of, at least from what I could find online, that you were very technical, or maybe that's my perception, at least from
Yeah,
what I
yeah, yeah.
see in terms of the things you publish or talk about. But like, how did that kind of came to be that chapter of like going in deep into that technical background and AI per se?
Yeah, yeah. I just been very, very lucky with amazing mentors that I've had that really kind of pushed me to do a lot of technical stuff early on in my career. The really, I like to think I'm well preserved, but I'm actually quite a bit older than I look. so, so I go way back, and before there really even was a field of HFI, and the very first book, probably the only book that was available, was Design of Everyday Things when I got started. And I really got started with databases, with backend, with Java systems. And so I got this very solid grounding in object oriented programming principles and how it all went end to end, soup to nuts, full stack development, all the way from retrieving the data to showing the data to the user, and then sort of end to end transactions, and then how the cloud works and all of that. So I actually was there when all of that was happening, and I think that made it very lucky because I always now both being very dangerous with respect to say, hey, this what you're saying is going to take a month. It's actually going to take like a day or two. That this isn't quite as difficult as you're saying, but at the same time, I'm also very cognizant of how much effort certain things take to build. And when somebody sort of slaps a type ahead text box on a page, I go, wait, hold on a second. That's not that easy because you need a database table of things, and where are we going to get those type ahead suggestions, and how is this going to work with the category that you pre-selected, and all of those questions, right? Because I kind of think as a developer. So, but again, very, very lucky in my career having had that grounding in solid software development practices and database design all the way through, and then getting hooked later in my life in the design. But I also know my limitations, right? Like, for example, I'm not as good as certain folks are in, for example, visual design. And I mean, I know when it sucks, but I don't necessarily know kind of how to do branding, for instance, or the creating cool marketing assets and so forth. I think that's always been a challenge.
Mm.
But then I know to kind of lean on my teammates and then let them shine in certain ways and remove myself when needed and just provide a bit of a guidance. And as a leader, I'm sure V, you do understand that it's the same kind of deal, right?
Yeah.
You have to understand your team and kind of know thyself as well. Know when you need to step in and when you need to step back and let other experts kind of come in and chime in.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
always a challenge.
I think, on that leadership aspect, I mean, I wasn't expecting actually to talk about leadership, but obviously we can touch it because it's at least to me, it's a fascinating topic, especially that now you have to lead within those dependencies of AI and emerging tech and even more uncertainty, which is always a challenge for leadership. But as you said, some people in a community sometimes message me and they maybe try to be tactful, but it comes out a bit oddly where they say, "Are you really a good designer?" And I'm like, I can't really respond yes, because what makes me a good designer or a design leader is the team who actually are specialists in different regards. But anyways, this is just like a tangential note on leadership part. But to do with the AI specifically, because that's why I really, really wanted to pick your brains on. To me, it seems like UX is being kind of put up on a back burner. And I know you are
Mm-hmm.
specializing in kind of like UX for AI. Were you kind of in the field for emerging tech for a while and then picked up AI as part of that?
That's a great question. And I think before I jump into that, I think you're absolutely right. We are being put in the back burner, and this is something that I've personally have been fighting very hard to change. And I think it's kind of the fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves. To use the Shakespearean point, and I think a lot of it comes down to the way that we have been operating as UXers, and that has to fundamentally change with this new technology that has made the field. Otherwise, we're going to see more layoffs. We're going to see more sort of being pushed to the point where we're becoming irrelevant to the whole process. We either are replaced by robots or just become so irrelevant that it's just a checkbox in the process, and that is something that I spend my lifetime trying to change. I think my personal arc is very much reflects that because from the start I gravitated toward very complicated projects that required a lot of learning upfront and a lot of understanding of the industry that I was in. I think my consulting aspect really prepared me for that. That I wasn't afraid. That it was more about learning, and I've established certain processes for myself that enabled me to very quickly get up to speed on a consulting project because you don't have the luxury of 3 months of learning and months of research and so on to understand a particular problem. And I think that's not having that muscle is where it hurts us now. We're having a focus that is on tooling, for example, and over focused on Figma and auto layouts. And yeah, you're this Figma expert, perhaps, but all you can do is create pictures at the end of the day. And you're not really up to speed enough to engage on fundamental questions about a product and how a product market fit is happening, or how this product is going to be making money, or how this product is going to be solving a particular customer problem. Instead, all you're talking about is auto layouts and components and be
Yeah.
to stretch the page and all that, and all you're doing, it's still at the end of the day is just pictures, right? And we really have to internalize that, as painful as it is, that at the end of the day, this things are pictures and they are going to be done by robots in a year or two at the most,
Mm.
if not months. And what we really should be caring about is connecting the business, the data science, the customer, and the development together in the package, and really making creative solutions happen in that space, and bringing people together and having difficult, creative, interesting conversations, facilitating those, and really driving the solution rather than driving more Figma mockups or driving more Figma auto layouts, and just change the focus, right? The whole focus is got to be very, very different for us if we're going to succeed and not become utterly irrelevant as an industry.
But this is where I have a lot of thoughts and mixed feelings, I guess, about that. Because when you were saying about it, what came to my mind, and I'm totally with you, and something I try to share in my community or coach and guide people to not get attached to the tools, because the tools are making you a really good technician who operates the machinery or the tools, but it doesn't really make you a designer. That's way beyond it. And in my head, there is so many types or so many ways to design things. And to design with Figma is just one of those things. I think majority of the openings are requiring people to just be kind of Figma jockeys and forget the rest and be less strategic. And I feel like we've seen years of that, whereas so many people, I guess, lost that UX way in a way,
Yep.
where that strategy and connecting the dots kind of got lost in a way. And that's what kind of scares me the most, where I'm trying to bring people to sanity in a way. But I'm also cognizant that the market and all those, let's say, PMs or whoever are hiring for designers, they're hiring a design leader who would look at Figma first, and that's what
Yep.
we need. And then it almost goes against of what we all know has to happen. What has been your perspective in terms of the market itself?
There's this beautiful from Neil Gaiman. It's about Morpheus, right? Who loses. He gets so lazy, right? The bottom line, he's been at it for years and years, thousands of years, and he gets so lazy that he puts a lot of himself into these tools. And he has, pouch of sand and the ruby and the helmet, the helm, and all of that kind of stuff. And these are the tools that he uses to enter the dreaming and make things happen in the dreaming and so on. But without giving too much away, I would say one of the tools is Ruby, and this unfortunate person gets a hold of this Ruby, and he's almost like the PM with Figma, and so he just like, this is it, this is the design, right, and this is the essence of dreaming. I can destroy dream by destroying this Ruby, and he just gets so focused on this Ruby, and finally he smashes it, and all it does is just all that energy then goes back into the Lord of the Dreaming, and he opens up again and says, yes, I regained my power by destroying this tool that I had. I regained my power. So very much the same thing is happening here. These PMs are getting a hold of the Ruby and thinking this is the design. This is design, right? This Figma is what design means. And that is almost, but not entirely, completely the opposite situation. Design is everything around it, and maybe the Figma is the documentation. So by detaching ourselves from the tool, we can actually achieve our ultimate expression of power and freedom and contribution, and to be ourselves in the most fundamental sense. And I believe AI is going to do it for us one way or the other. It's going to happen.
Yeah, I think
It's
it's
not
gonna
it's not up to
force
us.
us.
Right. It's going to
Yeah,
force us.
yeah.
Exactly. That's going to force us. This Ruby is about to be destroyed. And if you read my blog, I talk about how Figma has got the latest iteration of AI so wrong, and so wrong that they had to pull it almost immediately within 24 hours of release, and why that is the case. So they themselves are confused about their reason for existence and their own sort of mission in changing environment and the changing ecosystem of tools. So they themselves are confused, and for good reason. It's a very confusing time. But if you hold true to your ideals of what makes you a designer, which is to solve difficult problems in the real world, to talk to people, to conduct the research, and then take your understanding of technology and of the user's problem or
Yeah.
challenge, and putting that together in a creative fashion with the appropriate technology to then generate a solution in the appropriate time frame and on budget, that's design. That's the core of the design. The Ruby, the Figma is just there to help you get there. It is not design. Figma, Figma is not design. Your auto layout monster with your four different auto layouts that you move around, and it's all beautiful. Or better yet, my another pet peeve is animated pages in your prototype. Like, this is not design. This is not
Yeah.
design. This is just
It's a
documentation.
communication tool,
It's
right?
a
Like it,
communication tool.
yeah, like to
Exactly.
me it's something which is maybe worth highlighting as well. It's we are only busy with Figma because we don't know how to express those ideas directly in code, because ultimately everything happens in
Exactly.
code.
Yes. Code.
And Greg, I don't know if you played with Cursor AI or combination of Cursor AI and Claude, which is basically a prompt-based coding. I actually spent a good couple of hours last week just playing around, and I was thoroughly impressed because I can literally screenshot a website, any website like LinkedIn, and asked
Mhm.
for it to be replicated in React, and I get a specific semi-functional, I guess, app, and I can iterate and I can ask, design upgrades and updates and things of that nature. The Cursor AI just keeps churning, keeps updating, keeps connecting to different APIs, things of that nature. It's actually impressive because any designer now could literally design things within those means in the actual command line interface instead of a Figma. You could bypass that thing, and that's to me it's a glimpse of a future, because I do believe that at some point that design and code, the two disjointed things, are going to have to be bridged in some regard, because we are doing so many multiple translations, and translations from the translations, abstractions are mixed here and there. It's just so much inefficiencies, and a lot of symptoms are coming from that regard as well, where you have design engineering picking up the speed. And I think the tools, especially the disruptive ones, are going to pave how we do design in the end. And I don't know how much we can escape from Figma or Cursor AI now, or anything else, but I wonder if you had any chance to look at it at all or experience that yourself.
I've tried similar things and blogging about similar type of transformation happening for quite some time. So you're speaking my language. I don't think the future is pictures at all because, I don't know if I can say this on your show, but,
Please do. Everything
yeah.
goes. Everything and anything goes. So
Code talks, bullshit walks, right? So at the end of the day, it's all about the code. If that's what we ship. That's the product. No matter how good your pictures are, which is why I've always kind of really shunned this I would say, over focus on Figma componentization and all this auto layout stuff. It's just at the end of the day, these are just pictures. They're just pictures, right?
mm,
They don't mean a thing unless it becomes code, unless it becomes a product. With AI, the fortunate thing is you don't really need that. And products like UXPin, for example, that's been going direct to code for quite some time. They're all their components are directly in code in React. So when you're adding a column to a table, you're essentially just adding a React column to a table. And when you're adding a text box, you're adding an actual text box, not you're not adding a picture of a text box, which is always an abstraction. And so you can test its behavior by literally trying to stretch and collapse the page and see all the column drops, behaviors, and all of that kind of stuff. You can see all that. You can literally put it in the browser and try increasing the font for different types of devices and see how it responds to touch and all of those things, which is what we should really be focusing on, is how do
mm,
we bridge that gap, the design and code. There seems to be two specializations that are evolving. One is the sort of generalized designers, which are going to be looking at typical design things. How do we solve problems? Interviewing customers, interviewing stakeholders, understanding how to work with AI that works for the product. Right. So the actual product design, I would say, or user experience design. And then the other set is very much specialized in design ops and how do we create better systems and how do we make those systems directly go to code? How do we maintain it? And how do we stop it from over multiplying, right? And how do we maintain consistency in our displays and branding and so on, so things look a little more cohesive and we maximize reuse and so forth. So I think if anything, this next phase is going to even more specialize it. Where yes, you can as a design ops person, you're essentially a custodian of design system in code, and that whole dichotomy of once a week talking to your developers to make sure your pictures match the reality. I think that's probably going to go away. It's going to be one and the same thing, and
Yeah.
AI is gonna help us get there very, very quickly. I imagine a tool like UXPin with the front end of something like Cursor AI, in addition to something like Figma, and then you should be able to circle pieces that you like and circle pieces that you don't like, and say, iterate on this, don't iterate on that. Also, I think a really big one is accessibility, and really bringing this together back to dream that we had of things being accessible. And one piece I should really mention is Jacob Nielsen, I think, came out with this very controversial article that said, accessibility is dead. We should really move on, and move into personalization. And I completely agree with him. I may be paraphrasing wrong. I don't think he said it was dead. He said it was more like we failed at it. And I agree, we did. It was never somehow forefront of people's minds enough. And yes, we advocated for it, and we really tried to make it monetarily viable, but it never really materialized. But now with AI, we can actually create individualized interfaces. So if I'm, for example, have you can see I'm wearing glasses, right? So maybe I want larger text, I want a little more contrast, but I am pretty savvy, so I can use all the doodads, and I understand, Ajax interactions, and my device is pretty high end. I'm on a MacBook Pro right now, versus somebody who is maybe has a really low bandwidth, and they're on the Canvas night somewhere with a very low bandwidth. Or they're completely vision impaired, or they can't see colors at all. And as they say, you've never lived until you work for a colorblind CEO, right, as a designer. So so
Yeah.
so maybe they're completely colorblind in a specific spectrum, and so they require a very different UI than I do, and there's no reason for me to go down to the level that person has to operate on. There's just, it makes no sense. It never did, actually. Yes, accessibility features help everybody, like the autocomplete, the ability to spell check and autocorrect and so on. I think those are amazing features, and we need them in all our products. But there's absolutely no reason why these two particular individuals need to be using the lowest common denominator of the
Yeah.
interface.
I agree with you
It,
on that.
it
Yeah.
never made sense to me. I'm sorry if it upsets a lot of people, but it just never made sense to me. Instead, what makes sense is individualization. So
Mm.
if my AI agent talks to the company's AI agent and says, this person has these particular requirements, so they prefer this type of UI, and then UI is relatively flexible enough to then generate itself in real time to fit my needs, that's what we're talking about. And that's within 5 years. So it's UI that automatically rewrites itself
Yeah.
for in real time, as maybe it's interpretive language or something that specifically renders exactly how I want it. That's also branded. And by the way, I could be different places. I could be somewhere where the bandwidth is bad, or I could be driving and I don't need all the interactions. I don't need all the doodads. I need voice to text, for example. I need the whole interface read to me, and I need to be able to respond in voice. Why not do that? So even in a particular individual then is going to have a different UI requirement depending on where they are, what they're doing at the same time. Maybe I'm walking and I'm trying to cross the street, right? Try not to get killed at the same time. So there's there's a lot happening, and I think with AI we can do that. So
Yeah.
all those design ops folks, I think they are going to be responsible for making that whole machinery work. There's a lot there, and honestly, we don't have nearly enough people that are going to be doing this. So everyone who's interested in this is gonna have more work than they can possibly handle.
Yeah, I agree
So
with you.
so that's kind of those Figma jobs that are getting hired for. I think that's going to very quickly morph into, I would say, AI whisperers, for better or worse, right? Like folks that work with AI tools like Cursor, like Figma, like UXPin, like Usered, or whatever it is, right? To generate these custom UIs. And then you're going to have a lot of other folks that are UX people, that are generalists, that focus on research. They focus on everything else, essentially. How do we solve the right problem, right? So solve the problem the right way on one end, solve the right problem on the other. So how do we solve the right problem? How do we pick the right use case for AI? How do we pick the right model? How do we make sure the data is available? How do we put all this together in the way that actually solves customer problems, creates value for the enterprise in a reasonable amount of time? And again, we're kind of come up short there, to be honest, because a lot of folks are just this paint by numbers. I've heard from many people that I will not even touch the mouse until I have full requirements. That's boulder dash. That's nonsense. That's insanity.
Yeah.
Where do we get that? Like, that's insane. That's absolutely asinine.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
if
that.
that's how you're thinking, done. Like, just
Yeah,
go
but
do something else with your life.
it's also so much of it's so widespread as well, because when you were
Yes.
describing all these cases, you see, I think I'm with you, and highly so, or widely so, because I think there's always going to be a need for artisan work or boutique type of agency work. You know what we have right now, we have these specific ways to solve problems. We have UX, but we have UX consultancies. We have UX boutiques. We have permanent people in UX or in visual design or interaction design. But I think those roughly buckets would persist. It's just that we might need less of them. And when you were describing the accessibility opportunities, I guess it's also, we have quite a few specialists who dedicate their lives to accessibility, but in reality, we only need to get it right once. And then we're able to use the model or the models, and the models could train themselves with, let's say, the rise of AI agents. At some
Mm-hmm.
point, our focus is definitely going to shift. And like the numbers, I think it's going to, for the right reasons, reduce. Because if we ideate on a future where every tool already has a built-in model of accessibility and it adapts and it's a multi-model, then it's for a better. My the only concern is that just because we can, it doesn't mean we're gonna do it, because we can do a lot of things right now as well, but we keep replicating, let's say, every, well, I wouldn't say every company or every project they work on, but if you go through, let's say, clients, I used to do consulting like yourself, right? And I would basically engage, and every time I have to restart the conversation on accessibility or on user research or on those pivotal elements of UX, it's still like the battle you kind of have to fight. So I think, someone needs to commercialize, and I don't know who that someone is, but I totally agree. Like at some point, it has to snowball, because there's obviously going to be legislative pressures of making it
Mm-hmm.
right. I know US is spearheading a lot of that, surprisingly not EU
Well,
for once, but
it's so funny because I'm literally thinking it's the other way around. That
right.
especially Denmark
Yeah,
yeah, those places, I think they're much more ahead of us.
I think it's just because,
Canada's always been
yeah,
really good about it too.
I think US is for the reasons of, I guess, lawsuits and suing, it's much more free form, so to speak, than in other countries. That's why it seems it's much more harsher, where people actually going to be careful and say, hey, hold on, we actually need to make this accessible or inclusive, or so to speak. But yeah, I generally feel like we're already put on those rails and we're kind of heading to that destination. But I think, could I pull back a slightly? I think
Sure,
we
sure.
have so many generative AI projects or startups, or a lot of PMs, CEOs, founders, stakeholders. They're trying to take a square peg and put it in a round hole, basically, and it's a continuous kind of effort to, and everybody's using other people to compete with, such a circus race, so to speak.
Yeah,
And I don't know, what's your
yeah.
take, like what can we do, and also not just what can we do as UXers, but what's to come too.
I love it. I love it. I think one thing we got to do is just stop looking at our industry to tell us what's next. Like, it's pretty clear Figma is not going to be telling us, and we just have to stop, right? That's just not where the future is right now. They're behind the curve. And it's not the first time, right? If we look at InVision, for example, and I've wrote extensively about my frustrations with the tool and how they really have, screwed the pooch on that, to to use the American expression. Right. I think Figma is doing the same thing, unless they really are willing to pivot and disrupt themselves. So instead, let's look at what is succeeding. First off, if we look at ChatGPT as a kind of a wider, just general application. I think it's already proven so many more applications than blockchain in 10 years of existence. One year ChatGPT has given us so many different ways to apply it. That said, a lot of people are trying, exactly like you said, they're trying to take a square peg and fit into a round hole. And folks just don't understand what this is good for, so they try a lot of things and they throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall and just to see what sticks. Unfortunately, they're not using UX to its full potential, which would short circuit a lot of this trial and error and make it much more streamlined. Because in the UX, we've created a system for innovation that decreases the risk and decreases time and improves our understanding and the speed to fail. Literally, we literally fail very very quickly that and cheaply. And that is a very good thing because you don't need to build something to fail it. You just need to build a quick prototype, go out, talk to your customers, and then go, oh, that doesn't work. Okay, what is keeping you up at night? One example comes to mind is from this smart irrigation company that I consulted with. And their idea was that they were going to provide some sort of irrigation insurance to talk to these third generation farmers and tell the farmers, look, we have all these sensors in the field and you spend all this money and now you know that your crops are sufficiently watered. Now, when I went out in the field and talked to these guys, what we found out is they have no issue knowing their crops are sufficiently watered. Every morning they get out in the field, they take literally the heel of their shoe, they drive it into the ground, and based on how far that heel goes into the ground, they know the crops are watered or not. And they don't need a fancy AI robot and thousands of dollars of investment to tell them that the crops are sufficiently watered. They would laugh at this proposition, and they did because they know this land like the back of their hand, and they know it better than they know their children. And they're third generation farmers. Like, there's no way you're going to tell these experts what to do. So then we said, okay, that's clearly not working. What does keep you up at night? Well, it turns out there was plenty. There's the global warming, climate change, depends however you want to call it, but the climate is changing. Irrepressible fact, even though some people in our government are insisting this is just an illusion. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. This is all. It's just an illusion. The hurricane is not happening. Whatever is going on. So the point is that's happening. The farmers know it's happening, whatever their party affiliation. And then those guys, how do we deal with it? There's also stringent government regulations about clean water. There's also more farmers trying to draw more water from the aquifer, right, all at once. It's the same aquifer. So you and all your neighbors are pulling the water from the same place. So there's a lot of regulations. How much water can you pool? Clean water, how clean it has to be, etc. So those things are really keeping them up at night. So so I said, okay, so what if we offered to you a solution that allows you to water less and still get the same yield or as good a yield as possible given the water restrictions that you have? They're like, oh, yes. When can I have this? Which is exactly the kind of question that I look for in research. I want to hear, when can I have it? Because that means they're gonna pay for it. That means they actually want it, right? It's not like, yeah, I don't know, maybe not me, but Joe down the street might like this. UX is able to do this. We already have the tools to do this. It's the same tool
It's
that
a
we've
simple
always used.
tools. Yeah.
It's the same tool. We don't need anything else. We have the tools to create scenarios and storyboards. We have the tools to go and do field research and talk to these people. We have the ability to do this. All we need to do is just remember that that's our true nature and crack that ruby and return to being who we are. Um, and
Yeah, it is a stark contrast as well, I think. And I also wanted to ask, I saw in one of your, actually a couple of your newsletters at least, storyboardings was one of the tools you picked up. And I was like, oh yes, this is amazing, because you went into depth and you kind of like described the ancient ways to storyboard and things of that nature. But why I'm bringing this up really is that to do good UX, you don't need to reinvent the tools, even if it's emerging tech. You're still considering the same dependencies. It's still stack of technology which could behave one way or the other. But the stark difference between us UXing things and us just taking the hypothesis some founder might have in agriculture, let's say, or agri-tech, and just going and designing something on Figma or hardware, or doing some industrial
Mhm.
design sketches, things of that nature. It's one way to solve this, but we deep down, I think everybody knows, like, you don't even have to do that to understand that this is not going to work. You
Yep.
kind of already failed with the hypothesis itself. Now you have to find out a bit more. I think I'm summarizing it probably in how you meant it, right? Paraphrasing
Yeah,
it.
it's exactly right. Yeah, I think in my estimation, so 85% of the AI projects fail. That's according to Forbes and Gartner.
Yeah.
I didn't come up with that number, and that is a crazy number when you think about the amount of investment that is happening. But that, in my estimation, having done 32 projects, that is correct. The good news is for us is that the most of the time it doesn't fail because the technology is not capable. It fails because UX just wasn't involved in the right
Mm.
place in the right time.
Yeah.
And I would say again, out of that, I would say maybe 80%. If it's getting better, but I'd say a very large number of this fails on the very first step. It's the wrong use case that we're solving. It's like smart water irrigation company that I was talking about. There are
Mhm.
many other examples that I have from industrial IoT space, from many other examples. So right off the gate, you torpedo your project because you're going after the wrong use case. And that is
Mhm.
why I am so adamant to emphasize with my students in my workshops. As one actually coming up on UX Strat on September 9th. If you're able to to attend, that's really worthwhile.
I'll look
But
into it.
it's
Yeah.
you got to start at the attacking the right use case, and that means you're able to really solve the problem that the people are having with AI better than the way that they're currently solving it. Because for better or worse, most people are solving problems already, right? Like those farmers, they know the crops are sufficiently watered. They're guessing how little or how much water to apply, so they're solving the problem. It's not like a problem isn't solved. For example, self-driving cars, same thing. There's Uber drivers, there's
Yeah.
Lyft drivers, there's people drive themselves. Amazing, right? Like there is public transportation, maybe in Europe, but not so much in the US. But outside of Oregon, I suppose.
Yeah.
But there's ways to get around. There's bicycles and so on,
Yeah.
right? It's not like AI is going to be like, oh my god, where we've been before self-driving cars. Wow, right? Like people are solving a problem. So can first question is AI going to make it better? And then we start getting into questions like evaluation, right? When AI takes a wrong guess, false positive, false negative, how much is it really impacting your bottom line? Is it for example, if I'm doing a mass mailing and I am targeting a bunch of people with, say, offering them a new program, new checking account, for example, I'm a financial institution. That's one of the things I had to deal with is you send a bunch of email, you say, hey, we got this new cool checking account, and then your AI takes a guess. Do I target this person or not? Let's say I make $1,000 every time somebody opens an account with this new program, and let's say I made a false negative, so I didn't send them a mail, so I lost $1,000. But a false positive at the same time is quite low, because unless I'm sending too many mailings and people are just gonna turn this thing off altogether, maybe it's $1 or two, right? What's the likelihood of them getting pissed off and turning this off? Maybe it's 1 out of 100, right? So now you're talking about $100, or sorry, $10, $10. So out of you get what I mean? $1,000 in a
Yeah.
plus, $10 in a negative. So it's pretty clear I can make 100 wrong guesses and still come out ahead, or 99 wrong guesses and still come out ahead. So, which is why everybody gets so many spam messages, right? Because the false negative is very high, but false positive is very low. Entering into that kind of conversation is where we need to be as UXers. We need to be able to have that conversation. What is your model predicting? What is the false positive? What is the false negative? So that's the next step after getting the use case correctly. And then after that, you need to figure out what are the inputs and what are the outputs, right? And go into conversations about digital twin. what type of data are you getting? And
That's
it's not
music to my
a,
ears.
right. Can you
Yeah,
actually create a predictive model that is going to work to solve the use case you're trying to solve based on the data you're actually getting? In one famous example, it's the one I talked about, the noodles being boiled. It's an industrial process similar to a noodle pot that's being boiled, but we were able to collect things like pressure and temperature, not to kind of overboil your noodles. But one thing we were not able to collect with AI is this idea that the operator could look through the window and see the boiling water, see the surface of the water, how much is it boiling? Because as you know, if you ever boiled noodles, it's pretty explosive, right? It's like
yeah,
everything's fine, and then you turn it up just a little bit, and the whole thing goes
yeah.
you
There
know
is
goes
a
out of
lot
the
of
pot.
grades to boiling, right? It's not just boiling zero or
It's not
one, but
just
yeah,
exact, especially something viscous like noodles, right? It also changes as the noodles change in the pot. See, my last name is Nudelman, so I know a little something about noodles, evidently. But
yeah,
the point I'm trying to make is that AI was not able to see the surface of the water, and the operator could. And so by not being able to see it and only relying on the temperature and pressure, that was not enough to make that prediction correctly. So the model itself, in other words, the data coming in into your digital twin was not enough to support the conclusion that AI was generating. So again, you need to go out in the field, you need to ask the right questions, you need to see this kind of stuff to make that determination. You need to then sit down with your data scientists and then discuss, is the right data coming in? Can you build a model using temperature and pressure alone to then
mm,
predict when your pot of pasta is going to overboil? Turns out, no, you cannot. You cannot do that. And that was one of the projects that failed. It's a spectacular screw up. 6 months of, 7 people's work just out the window. So, yes, it can fail on all of these different places that we just touched on. But most of the time, right out of the gate, you torpedo it by picking the wrong use
yeah,
case, where UX can come in and help you fail much faster before you get to actually
mm,
building the problem by building quick prototypes or even just a storyboard. Like you said,
yeah.
a quick storyboard, show it to the customer. Does this make sense to you? Would you pay for this? Do you want this? And they might say, well, it sounds nice. Then
But
probably
I'm
no,
not
you
gonna
don't want
pay.
to be doing that.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is usually the case, but that's where, like, to me, the beauty of UX is that it usually the course correction is just one question away. It's just as simple as you were
Exactly.
like
One
mentioning a
question away.
digital twin, by the way, for folk, because I know a lot of people haven't heard what is really digital twins in terms of UX and how we work with AI.
I love that question. I think you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, most folks, and I think that shows the self-imposed helplessness of UX. The fact that we're not talking about this. We need to be talking about this. We need to be talking about value matrix and true positive, false positive outcomes. We need to be talking about actual monetary values of this. We need to be talking about digital twins and the use cases. Instead, we're like that. We have dinosaur hands, right? Like this T-Rex hands. I could if I could just reach it, but my hands are like right here and I can't, right? If I could just ask that question, like you know what I'm saying, like
Yeah.
T-Rex hands, that his little paws are
But
right here. So
are we self-limiting because we are not looking into new tools, or how do we impose those? I guess
well,
we're putting shackles on our hands, basically, in other hands, right? Like, but
exactly.
like what?
It's force helplessness where
Mm,
we have conditioned, for better or worse, we have conditioned ourselves. It's like that elephant, right, that grows up with a chain around its ankle, and then pretty soon it's just a little rope, and they can tear it without even thinking about it. But they think, oh yeah, no, I'm not supposed to do anything until I get requirements, and so I'd say, to your earlier question, like, yes, you can get hired to work with the rubies, but at the end of the day, you can volunteer to do, say, field research and get. So, oh, you guys seem to be wondering about whether this is a good use case. Why don't I go out there and ask some customers about it? I actually happen to have this wonderful tool called field research or contextual inquiry, and I can go and ask the questions. What do you say I go do that? Well, we can't possibly pay you for it, and there's no time for it. Well, I'll just go do it for free as part of my job. Just keep paying me for this. Maybe I'll go and spend a couple of hours on the weekend and go ask these folks about their fields and take a field trip. whatever, just volunteer for it, right? Just it's going to be very quickly you're proving the value. I can tell you there's absolutely no substitute to when an executive asks you a question and then you say, well, when we interviewed 6 of our users, 5 of them said they really have no interest in doing this, versus I think our users not going to like it. Like, what is, is a huge difference within the two statements. They can ask questions like, are those the right customers? Are we talking about, red ocean, blue ocean? Like, those are much better questions. Are we talking about, what use case did they want to answer? That's an even better question. So if an executive is worth their salt, that is going to be their next question. What did they want to do? And then, of course, you have the answer for it, right? Right away, you come back and say, well, actually, what they really wanted is XYZ. How about we do this? Like, and by the way, I have a little storyboard. I have a mock-up that took me, 3 minutes to make using, a bunch of sticky notes.
Yeah.
How hard is that, right? It's really not that difficult. In fact, as you're talking to customers, why not just take a moment and go ahead and sketch a possible solution for them and say, what if it did this? Like, is that what you're talking about? Like, is that what you mean? Like, it can be a storyboard, it can be an actual interface. It's co-creation. And while they're in the moment, that's exactly the time to catch them. In other words, you already have all the tools you need as a UXer to do this. What you need to do is abandon the learn helplessness of I'm not moving my mouse
Mm.
until I get my full requirements in the Jira ticket and I have everything out. That's such a bullshit. Come on, guys. It's just let's just leave that behind, right? And really embrace our true nature, which is problem solvers. We're problem solvers. We're creative problem solvers. Let's go get creative and problem solve. And to do this, I think we need to go back to these modeling tools. And the modeling tools for AI are storyboard, it's your value matrix, and it's your digital twin. So a digital twin is essentially a modeling tool to have a high quality conversation with your team. You draw us the picture of your system in the middle. You see what's coming in, maybe on the left, if you're in the Western world, things are written from left to right, right? You come, metrics coming in on the left, you got a picture in the middle and what's coming out on the right. And then when you do this, you can have a conversation with your data scientist. You say, is this enough to, is this going to make enough of a model? Can you predict if you get X and Y, can you predict Z? And, they might say, no, we need, ABC as well as this, and we need all this other stuff. And then you have a conversation about the data and you say, oh, do we have data actually to do this machine learning? Where's the data going to be coming from? Do we have legal right to the data? Did we have our customers sign a paper or an agreement to say we can use their data to train our model? A lot of times that's not the case. A lot of times when we work with oil and gas, for example, a lot of these oil and gas giants, they were doing their own thing. So they did not want their data used to train any of the models. And that was very, very explicit in their desire. And that's right away, that whole thing fell on its butt and got destroyed, right? All their dreams got smashed because nobody wanted that. They wanted to own all their data.
Mm.
So that digital twin picture, as simple as it is a tool to have a high quality conversation about all these very important considerations. Again, it's something I specialize. I think you probably can hear the theme. It's things you could do in a minute or two that
Yeah.
then allow you to have a much better conversation, much, upscale your conversation, remove the dinosaur arms and have your full arms from which you can embrace the problem and really try to get your arms around it.
And it's not that scary either.
It's not that scary.
The leap from Figma
Very
to
simple.
that, I remember the moment when I had to. And by the way, to add to your collection of tools, what back in the day when I was just entering like machine learning based projects, and that was way before the generative AI. I've mentioned this by the way on a few episodes, so it's not going to be anything new for the audience. But I used to employ also this tool called the cognitive behavior mapping 2, where you talk to a person and you literally ask them to give you a trail of their thoughts of how they make a decision to interact with something, and you get the inputs, you get the outputs, and then you just simply have a conversation to ask how strong is the connection between one and the other. And that almost produces you this fuzzy cognitive map, very rudimentary neural network ultimately of how they make the decision. And obviously, it's not going to work entirely, but you with data science, with a lot of other people, can start building model upon that, because now you know how the person makes a decision in certain situation. But I feel like, still, to get back to my point, to go from nothing to that is just an article away. You can read about it, you can start applying it safe enough, you can talk at least with a team to say, hey, could we trial this out? Because trialing usually doesn't cost you much. As you said, like what kind of like I do agree with, and what a lot of us started in UX as well. We learned the methods, even if it's a simple user research technique or card sorting or something, tree testing along the lines. I learned it by reading it on a lunch break, or learn as in knew about it enough to start applying, to start connecting the dots. It's that peripheral time you kind of have to spend. And I don't want to be an advocate of saying you have to do more work. It's just different kind of work. It's like, how can you pull back the Figma time and maybe
I
add
love what you said. Yes,
a
I'm
few
taking
minutes of that
crazy notes
other?
here. Yeah, different work. It's think of it as monkey work, robot work versus strategic value work, human work. Anytime somebody says, "Can you do this in Figma?" Fit requirements within a year, I can almost guarantee you within a year that's going to be AI, robot, monkey work. That is not human work anymore. If you read some of my stuff about short notation, essentially if you just want a table, all you have to do is just put columns in there and put a vertical pipe, and a tool like UXPin already does this. A tool like ChatGPT, just try it with ChatGPT. If you don't
Yeah,
believe me, just say I want a table that has these columns in it, and then see how it does it, because it will automatically write, justify, for example, amounts. It will automatically format date and time correctly. It will automatically put the name. Do you want to split the name? Okay, you can do split the name. You just enter, yeah, split the name, split the address. Like, it will do all this stuff already. So if you spend more than 10 minutes of your day last week making tables in Figma, I urge you to stop and consider what V just said, which is that stuff is gone. Like, if you're making simple forms, if you're making simple forms, if you're making simple tables, that is now robot work. That is not human work anymore. So
yeah,
just stop doing that, right? Like, you don't need to do this anymore. What you need to be doing is upscaling your work into these questions. And it's absolutely what V just said. I absolutely echo that. None of this stuff is complicated, but this stuff is sophisticated as hell. So the difference is, my Aikido instructor, Sunny Skies, that's his actual name. So he often said, look, Aikido is very, very simple. It's only 5 moves. That's it. But you can spend a lifetime learning that. It's the same thing with UX, right? All these tools that we just talked about, the storyboard, digital twin, cognitive behavior mapping, field research. These things are really very complicated, very simple to get started. They're not complicated. You can read an article and then try it out, but they're very, very sophisticated. So you can spend a lifetime in mastering it, but it's very easy to get started. And so
yeah.
you should get started if you haven't been doing it, especially if your job has involved more than 10 minutes of table making in the last week. That job is going to be gone in a year. I am sorry to say that is over.
Yeah, and I think this is where, yeah, I love that we already kind of got into advice for, because it's going to make it so useful for everyone listening. But I think the biggest elephant in the room is that existentialism, and the question is if it's worth it. Because you see, my
That's a good
community on
question.
Discord has 17,000 people, and I would bet that 16,000 of them are people who want to get into UX, or
Hmm.
they might be juniors or midweights, but they're basically are at that entry step of it. And I get these frequent engagements and questions. And there's also a lot of people who want to transition to UX from other fields like development and sales and everything in between. So
Hmm.
there's also that, because they think that UX is visual and it's quite easy to learn, which is definitely not the case. It's a lifetime of learning. um, But what would be your advice for those people who are, we might be out of uni, or maybe they're just trying to study, or perhaps they're even a senior who's a disenfranchised from all the UX world? Like, what would you tell them right now?
I love that you brought it back to the beginning. I think it's that same joke, right? We got into this not because it's easy, but because we thought it was going to be easy. So yeah, it looks very easy. It really is not. It's if you think it's easy, then why does Oprah has the status that she does as an interviewer? I think if you want a good interview example, that take a look at that. She's fantastic. Do you think that's an easy skill to do that type of interviewing? Absolutely not. It's very, very, very. It takes a lifetime to master. It's easy to get started because you just ask questions, but again, which questions to ask and how do we follow up and how do we interpret what the person's saying, right? All of that stuff goes into it. There's a reason why she's paid the big bucks, right? So none of this stuff is easy, but if you have an affinity for solving problems creatively, if what we described sounds fun and interesting, there's definitely a room for you in the profession. I think we're going to need more UXers, not fewer. On both sides, it's just going to be very much more specialized. Right now, it's a bit of a mixture. Some folks do UX and design ops intermittently. I think we definitely going to specialize, and especially for those folks that do a lot with React with UI components already. I think there's definitely going to be more. You're going to be busier than a one-handed person trying to
Yeah.
wallpaper a room. You're going to be very, very busy. Just give it a year or two. I think folks are going to discover the personalization and the amount of money you can make by personalizing the UI is going to be it's staggering. I think there is just so much hidden value there. And then, folks that are interested in solving bigger problems, again, no shortage of that. There is poverty and extremism and, misinformation and global warming, some of the few that we even mentioned in the last hour. So there's no shortage in really just BHAG, big, hairy, audacious problems for you to solve. So I think we're going to need more UXers. It's just right now our industry is kind of in this forced helplessness with the dinosaur arms, and that I think is not the way to go forward. There's just no, it's not going to be the case a year from now. I think we're going to really see folks that are not embracing kind of their true nature and not adding value and doing monkey robot work. I think those jobs are going to be gone. Like that whole
Yeah.
period where we've been in the last 5 years, I would say, of I'm just going to copy Amazon, I'm going to copy Apple, and I'm going to come out with another website that looks almost exactly like it, and I'm going to do it all in Figma, and it's going to be awesome. I'm going to get paid buku bucks for it. I'm sorry to say that's also gone. Like I think that's something that robots are going to do much better than us, in especially supported by that solid design system that is built based on branding that you have, and then connected directly to code. Like there's just no room for pictures anymore. I'm sorry to say, it's just going to be
I think I would challenge
it's
you again
gone.
from the point of that boutique or
Oh
artisan
yeah,
type of, when you, let's say, go get a pair of leather shoes right now, like you can get something which is a piece of art made by hands and pay a top price, but you then go to a selected few people who make it, who specialize just in that, who dedicated whole life. Maybe it's a family run business and that's what they do. Because you could just go into a factory and get it cheaper, or sorry, buy from a factory run type of shop. And I think that's probably, to me, is a very simplified analogy of what's going to happen to design. Because again, there are magicians, apps like, hands down, I cannot even criticize anyone who does Figma, but there is just selected
exactly.
few who are going to continue doing it. I think the rest of the people, I don't want to scare anyone or be concerned, but they must kind of zoom out and reflect, like, is this what I'm doing? Could it really be done by Figma AI once they relaunch, if they
Yep,
relaunch?
exactly.
And the answer is already yes, because they already had like a very crappy model which was trained on some sort of mysterious system. They say it wasn't trained on anything, but then everything is trained. Like you
Yep,
have to have an
exactly.
answer to answer a
It's
question.
yeah.
Um, so, so if you saw that and you think, crap, my job is probably going to be in danger, it probably is. And I
Probably
felt
is.
the same way with user research and strategy and everything, every skill set I kind of went through and evaluated of like what could happen, what couldn't happen. And by at this point I'm okay because I know, okay, these are the things which are gonna go first. This is what's gonna go last. That's how I'm positioning myself.
I think as much as people kind of touting the creative nature of these models, they really aren't that creative. That they're not going to create something from scratch. That's still a very human thing. Empathy, being able to take empathy and understanding of technology and then convert it into a solution. I think that's probably never going to be something that AIs are going to do well. They're definitely not going to do it anytime recently. But if all you're doing is here's a very specific set of requirements, I'm going to look at my design system and create a page.
Mm.
That is exactly what AI is really, really good at. Because those requirements where the PMs are giving you in the Jira ticket, they can just as well give it to AI. And then as long as it has a set of really good pieces, it can then construct those pages. And then PM can then go and say, well, I want this, I want that added. It's very, very simple for it to do. But AI is not going to be talking to your customers. Yes, there's all that synthetic user thing is awful. So let's just not even go there because it's just too awful to contemplate. I think that's a giant mistake for UXers to interview synthetic users, whatever that even means. That's just an awful idea to begin with. Let's just throw that away.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm with you.
right away, right? Like that whole thing is quite silly, but it can definitely learn from other patterns. It can say, oh, I have these 10 pages here in the system that look like the page you're trying to make. It's pattern recognition. Anything that's pattern recognition and derived functionality, it's really, really good at. Play with Midjourney, play with what V mentioned, which is cursor AI, and play with User and Figma. Play with these tools, ChatGPT most importantly with Claude, and just see what it does, and then extrapolate. I think it's perfect advice for UXers to really, don't just take our word for it.
Yeah.
Really study the tools and what they're good and what they're terrible at, and then see how your skill set compares. Bruce Sterling, I think, said the future is here, but it's just
Yeah.
not evenly distributed. Yeah, so I think it's definitely the changes here for UX, and
Mm.
the party's over. It's almost, it may be not over in your particular corner of the universe, but for all intents and purposes, the party's over. We need to get off our high horse and our white tower and come down to where the money's made and contribute, be team members, and not be sort of the oracular expression of customer interaction, or this
Mm.
is the gatekeepers of accessibility,
Yeah.
or anything like that, right? It's about, how do we solve really difficult problems, create value.
Where could people find more about you?
Thank you so much, V. I really appreciate it. It's ux4ai.com. It's very easy, ux4ai.com. What I focus on specifically in the blog is how do we use these very quick tools, very simple tools, to do the research and to generate better AI driven products. So the title of the blog is Leadership or Leading the AI Driven Products. So ux4ai.com. And I have a book coming out with my co-writer, Daria Kempka. We have a UX Strat workshop coming out, which is probably going to sell out like our UX Copenhagen and UX LX in Lisbon, and so I love speaking too. So if you want me as part of your conference, you can see I can't shut up. So if you want a keynote or a workshop and that involves a bit of travel, I'm definitely up for it. So please reach out. There's my contact is there at the ux4ai.com. Otherwise, catch me on LinkedIn.
Awesome.
And it's
Well,
been a
thanks so
pleasure,
much.
V. Thank you so much for having me.
Likewise. Thank you.